Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this podcast series called Business Insights here at Roland Berger. My name is Dorival Bettencourt. I'm a principal here in the Middle East, focusing on localization and socioeconomics, and I'm very excited to be here talking about this topic today. I've worked on this space for close to 15 years, all around the world, from Asia, Europe, Africa, Middle East. With governments, with the private sector. So it's very exciting for me. It's a passion. So I'm certainly very pleased to be here hosting this discussion. And I have a fantastic guest here with me, who is my esteemed colleague, but also a great friend, Zachary Kaplan, who is a partner with Roland Berger and also the global head of the localization and socioeconomics practice. So Zach, thank you very much for being here with us.
Really glad to be here. You never have to ask me twice to talk about this subject. For those I've had the opportunity to work with, teach on this subject, it's a passion, and it's interesting, and it's very relevant. It matters. It matters in the economies in which we work. It matters in how we're shaping the world in front of us and the economies in front of us. And there's so much to talk about. It's ever evolving. I've had the opportunity and the privilege with you in many ways to travel around the world and work on this in over 35 countries. I don't even know at this point. So thank you for welcoming me here today. And I'm looking forward to diving into some of the material and sharing some thoughts and stimulating the thinking around this.
Well, it's a real pleasure to have you. So today we're going to be focusing on global trends that we're seeing in this topic of localization, local content. But I think before we dive in, it's really important for us to establish some common concepts and terminology because, as you know, lots of terms are flying around: national content, ICV, in-country value, in-kingdom value, industrial benefits. So help us here and help the listeners really get a grounding in these definitions, and then we can move in.
Yeah, I think indeed we could create a whole encyclopedia of the various terms that do refer to a similar concept, which is localization. And localization is really about, it's an economic development tool. And I'd suggest, for the purpose of organizing our thoughts and our conversation, but also under which we can categorize the various terminologies around the world, is that localization is an umbrella term underneath which we can fit things like local content, things like community benefits, community development, industrial benefits, in-country value. Localization is a way that you can it has a geographic element to it, where you are localizing the production, the manufacturing of a good, or the development, provision of a service or a labor. Whereas in-country value or local content is a mechanism to measure. It's a mechanism to drive. It has a policy aspect of it. But localization does not necessarily result in the same things as local content itself. It can also include the location of a corporate office, which will have an impact on local value addition or local content, but may not necessarily. So there are various things that we need to unpack there. We do see around the world that there are different uses of the terminology, and they do link to a common concept around economic development and inclusivity and growth. But they all have their own nuances. In North America, we see things around industrial benefits, community benefits, First Nations content in Canada, Aboriginal content, for example, in Australia. We see things such in the Middle East as in-country value or in-kingdom total value add in KSA. Also local content defined there. So we need to be careful, and we need to map all of these, which we've done, and we're seeing probably more of a proliferation than not of additional terms.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So now that we've established these definitions, and you've been working in this topic for close to 2 decades now. I mean, I'm sorry to age you here on the podcast, but in this time, you must have seen some tremendous changes and kind of evolution in this space. Can you list out a few of the key topics or key trends that you've seen and changes over this period?
There's been a real transformation of this, as you've said, especially I'd say that's accelerated in the last 5 years or so. When I first got started working on this topic, it was very much steeped and linked almost exclusively into extractive industries, specifically around oil and gas extraction and mining a bit before that and in parallel. So we were looking at how in and around these mega developments, these multi-billion-dollar developments in energy or in mining, you can extend the benefits locally through the use of local labor, through the engagement of local workforce and jobs, and make sure that you are spreading the opportunities that are coming from this, not just from the selling of the product, but in the process itself. What has changed tremendously, one thing that has changed and transformed, is this is no longer a story about oil and gas or the energy or the extractive industries. This is now a whole of economy, all sectors included, application of an economic development tool. We see it in retail and wholesale. We see it in professional services, in health. I think there have been aspects of this. There are many aspects that are not brand new to any of those sectors. But the formalization, the consolidation, and the practice and thinking of driving localization in these is something that has come together in the last 5 years, plus or minus, in a way that we did not see before, and it was much more specific to sectors.
Yeah. Let me just do a quick follow-on on this. So you said that basically the topic started to really be, formalized and, let's say, driven within the extractive industry, right? Namely, oil and gas and also mining. And now that is being applied to basically the entire economy. What do you think is specifically driving that? Like, why would you do localization in, say, healthcare or tourism?
I think there are, over the last few years, there are a couple of global trends, dynamics, events that have really changed and pushed policymakers and decision makers, governments, and therefore the private sector in responding that have shaped this space. And I'll go through a few of those in my mind. The first one has to do with the topic of sustainability. So sustainability is now, there's the environmental aspect of sustainability that we know pretty well. There's the social side, there's the governance side. If we look from the social side of sustainability, there's more of a requirement and recognition that you need economic diversification in order to achieve resiliency. To get that economic diversification, you need to build out new industries or incubate or accelerate existing nascent industries and diversify your economy. And in doing so, you also need to, and governments want to, address public policy objectives such as job creation and wealth creation and inclusivity. So I think sustainability and the acceleration of sustainability as a top global priority has really accelerated and brought localization as a tool towards achieving sustainability to a level of prominence that we did not see before.
Okay. Well, there's quite a lot in there, so let's break this down a bit. Okay. So I think what I heard there, I heard a few topics that we're gonna dig into a little bit. I heard sustainability, I heard resilience, I heard diversification. So let's start. First of all, what I'm interested in understanding is, yes, there's been this sectorial, let's say, expansion of the topic. What about on a geographic level? Has there been any change there?
Tremendous change, and which is also, I should say, a factor of what makes it such an interesting topic for us to look at. This is not a story about OECD economies or developing economies. This is not a story about this is just relevant for those lions on the move economies that are trying to industrialize and move forward, which it was perhaps a few years ago. Localization and building out local supply chains, workforce, and increasing the value addition locally and diversifying is a story that expands and spreads from developed some of the biggest economies in the world, like the United States, all the way down to developing economies and those that are coming anywhere in the world with lower levels of wealth creation and GDP. So this is not. This truly is, ironically, the globalization of localization as a trend that is really applicable in its own ways to every single country around the world, not just a subset defined by a certain level of income.
Okay, that's fantastic. And we also heard you speak here about diversification, right? And that's probably very much linked to this whole point of the expansion of the topic across sectors. But we're sitting here right now in the GCC region. Diversification is top of mind, as you can imagine, right, for all the countries here, due to many reasons. But I think a big driver is, of course, the let's say acceleration of the energy transition and the need for these countries to stay relevant and stay competitive as you transition from resource-based economies into eventually being a knowledge-driven advanced economy. So tell me a little bit about how this topic is being driven here in the region as a vehicle for these very ambitious economic transformation visions that we're seeing.
Well, I think we have a couple of economic trends that localization, local content, ICV is trying to tackle, specific to the region. And we also have to be mindful that we can break the region down because each country within the region has its own unique priorities, its own socioeconomic policy objectives that are unique to that country. But if we do take it a level above at a regional level, what I think we're seeing is firstly, as sustainability as a global trend informs how economies are now developed and developing, there is the opportunity to leapfrog. There is the opportunity to build new industries of the future, green industries, green jobs, whether it's in renewable energy or in technology. And governments and policy decision makers are saying, that is the opportunity for me to build something new and to build it here because I have people who need jobs. I need to create an economy here as opposed to just importing, relying on imports for all of this technology and the actual manufacturing, assembling, processing, delivery of the good or the service that's associated with these new jobs, these new industries of the future. I think that there's a social element, which you have growing populations, you have more dynamic purchasing power. And so, again, governments and economies need to produce new jobs and jobs that people, that college graduates and those with specific skills need to feed into, and not the jobs and the industries of the past. Okay. So those are two of the elements I think that are shaping it specifically here in the region.
Okay, but so that's interesting. However, just to play devil's advocate here for a second, what you were mentioning here were essentially, national policy objectives, right? Public policy within specific countries. However, we know that these sectors and to be, let's say, sustainable and to actually have a lasting impact, these sectors are going to have to face global competition. Right. So how is this topic of global competitiveness also being factored in? Because yes, you need the jobs and yes, you need the diversification, but ultimately you need to be competitive. Right. So
absolutely.
Tell me a little bit about that space.
So I'm glad that you're bringing this other side of the scale. We've discussed the public side and why localization or local content and this practice it matters to the public sector and its objectives. It will go nowhere, and it's in large part it's only being driven, practically speaking, through the private sector, and it for related reasons, but its own motivations as well. First, one of those is there's a redefinition right now of what it means to be competitive as a business. Businesses have the challenge, but I would see it as now the opportunity. And many already are. Many of the biggest multinational and global leaders and businesses are seeing localization and local value addition and inclusivity as a defining feature, a brand differentiator towards their product or their service. So we're seeing that if we look at the elements of what it means to be a competitive business, localizing and having social impact is not something that happens at the end. It's baked into the decision-making and the strategy of the businesses themselves in order to improve their own competitiveness. It's an enabler towards competitiveness. And I think the second thing that's really, really important is the end beneficiaries and the consumers all around the world are demanding of their companies from which they procure, they buy, whether it's coffee or whether they get their energy and their utilities. There's a level of accountability and expectation now that these companies are accounting for these, that the story by which a product is made and how it goes through its value chain to get on the shelf or to get into my house matters. It's not just about the lowest cost anymore. Cost is absolutely still a driver, but how you got to that cost and the story by which this happens matters. And that is a big part of the S in ESG. That is a big part of it, which feeds up to sustainability. And there's no discussion of success, in my view, for a business in that journey that does not explicitly talk and account for and invest in this localization.
Excellent, excellent. So it's really become you'd say maybe a key business driver, right? A driver of competitiveness. But we know that businesses have other drivers, for example, sustainability. So what is the relationship, if any, between these two topics, localization, sustainability? Are they at odds? Are they complementary? Does one enhance the other? Tell us a little bit about that.
I think we can answer that and should think of it on a couple of levels. I think at a theoretical level, they're absolutely complementary and they're mutually reinforcing, localization and sustainability. Okay. One helps the other. Localization helps you achieve that future vision that we all share of a cleaner, more sustainable world across all aspects of it, environmentally, socially, economically. We're still new in this journey of how it's practically being implemented. Governments are still relatively new in this journey, as we said, as it's shifted just from one sector and it's looking at a much more comprehensive approach. And businesses are still learning and implementing new things. And so the way that the rubber hits the road right now on how localization is delivering upon sustainability goals, at the same time being competitive, I think we see lots of success stories, lots of great encouraging signs, and I think we're experiencing obstacles as well. And we're working these things through. That's why we're here talking about this. It's going to continue. It's growing. It's getting there. But we are assembling a group of better practices of how we do this, because we cannot sacrifice competitiveness. We cannot sacrifice cost and quality in anything that we do towards being sustainable and being local.
Excellent. That's very clear. So with all these trends and all this evolution that you've just described, right, from the time you started working on this, almost 2 decades ago, I imagine also, let's say, the practice of localization and the practice of local content in terms of the tools and the methodologies and the approaches have also evolved significantly, right, to match this evolution.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about how that's also evolved, the way that local content localization is actually thought about, implemented?
Absolutely. I think firstly we have to recognize that the professionalization, formalization of this space, this practice of localization, doesn't come in a vacuum. It didn't just land 5 years ago from an extraterrestrial entity that came into to the world. This is built on decades of economic thinking and policy and industrial policy and learnings and failures. And there are plenty who have worked on this topic of how you can localize, build local value. We talked about shared value for a very long time. So this is the next iteration of a long root system of things. And in many ways, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, of those who have tested and worked and thought about. What I would say, though, is today is that it is coming together in a professional practice way. It's being serialized and it's being brought to a level, as we said earlier, in a way that we did not see. Maybe it was more specific to that extractive industry sector or within agriculture in its own way, but we weren't thinking about the connection between extractive industries, localization, and local content and health or agriculture the way that we're thinking of it today.
Or purely driven by a functional aspect like contracting and procurement
or supply chain. Okay. That's exactly right.
Great.
So getting to your question, because I needed to make sure I made that point a little bit, and give credit where credit is due of why you and I are here talking about this, because so many have worked on it for so long, is I think we're seeing a quantification and the development of tools that can quantify and forecast out this relationship of what to do local versus global, what's imported, what's exported. That's one trend in products. So digital and digital tools, AI, are things that are feeding into this conversation in a way that certainly we did not have, I would say, 10 years ago, let alone 5 years ago. I think the second thing is experience. So there are more policies, there are more regulations, there are more people thinking and testing and learning what worked, what didn't work. If we can look on the journey of local content in the mining and the extractive industries over the last 40 years, what has worked, what hasn't worked. And so that allows us now, today, to craft better policy, or for businesses to have better strategies and implementation approaches towards tackling this topic in a way that we didn't have 5 or 10 years ago. I also think the final thing that's coming together is the awareness building and the thinking, conversations like we're having today, and dialogues around this topic that are making those strong connections with sustainability, with competitiveness, with geopolitics, with economic development. And I think we need to continue to build that dictionary of terms out, and we need to build out this language.
Yeah, fantastic. So we're good friends. So let me, maybe you'll allow me to put you on the spot, right? So if
we'll still be friends depending on the question.
If I took a copy of this Think Act publication, which is one of Roland Berger's flagship publications, and I said, I'm your client, and I say, I want to localize this. What are some of the challenges I would face, and some considerations that we should, be thinking about?
Sorry. It's okay. It's good to be tested. Depending on how I do, I don't know if we'll be friends after this. The 20-year journey may come to an end today. No, I think the first thing that we would want to break down there is what are the elements that go into producing this end product, from the thoughts themselves, the knowledge, the thought leadership, the knowledge, the human capital. You could almost
consider like the R&D, maybe.
The R&D, and also the entire the investment in human capital to get to build out the skill set of the humans that are going to generate this. Where is that happening? Is that happening in Washington, D.C.? Is that happening in Abu Dhabi? Is it happening in London, Nairobi, the Philippines? It could happen all of those places, one of those places. We have to think about that, because that matters when we talk about localization. Then there's the process by which that is extracted and put down and created into the stories that we're going to put here, and the pictures and the graphic design. And then the actual publication, both digital version of it and then the hard copy of that. And where should that happen? And throughout, we should not look at that and say everything here should be done locally. We need to look at the costs of each thing, what's efficient, what's effective, and then also what's going to have the greatest value impact. Because it could be very likely that 3/4 of all of those steps I just described in getting this magazine done should be done within the confines of this room.
Yes.
Not really, but I don't think you and I are that skilled. But the final one of publishing it or pushing the content out is more effectively done somewhere else.
Yes.
And that's not a bad thing. That could be the right decision given the limited resources and time and the objectives that we're trying. Okay. It requires, though, I think the lesson learned to me in this kind of exercise is we need to look at each one of these things. We need to break them down. We need to look at the costs. We need to look at the drivers and a short, medium, and long-term view to decide what is optimal, not necessarily what is the maximal.
Okay, great. Well, I think that we can all agree that Zach has passed my little test here. So with that, I think we can bring this episode to a close. Zach, thank you very much for sharing such great insights, and it was a real pleasure having you here. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did, and please stay tuned for more podcasts, more episodes digging into these very, very important topics. Thank you very much. Dorival, Bettencourt, and Roland Berger.
Thank you.